Dr. Rove go dtí ons legs Deranacht is strach leg the bliana shop. As this is the last lecture in the series, we have taken a rather unusual step, some would say maybe it's a historic step, of inviting a man of 98 going on 99 to talk to us about his life and times. He's a man who needs no introduction to many of you and maybe to any of you. He has lived through the momentous years of the 20th century, born in 1913. Before he experienced more his life, his early life encompassed the Easter Rising, the War of Independence, World War I, and very many other events. He has been a man who has, given us a lot of service in very many ways to all of the people here over the years. I would also, before we start, I'd like to introduce the other man sitting beside it. He's Michael Hayes, a veterinary colleague who was former Chief Veterinary Officer for North Tipperary. He's a man of committee member of the Ormond Historical Society, and he's there just, and you'll appreciate that he will be there if there's any assistance with anything required, and we know that Jack is well capable of looking after his own ends and his own business. So before we start, I'd like to just find out a few things. Maybe many of you will have questions, and we prefer if you keep the questions to the end, and if Jack feels able to. And so anyway, at this stage, I'll hand you over to our guest for the night, Mr. Jack Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to correct, this is not a lecture. But I suppose to start with, you want to know something about the Powells, where they came from, up to the present day. Well, to start with, my great-grandfather came to Blaine, which is a farm adjoining the village of Toomeybar, in 1825. He leased Blaine. I gather you couldn't buy farms then, but he leased Blaine in 1825. Yes, I'll tell you later on, he leased other farms, but we'll stick with Blaine. My grandfather was born there in 1830, William Powell, Blaine. And he died in 1913, the year I was born. My father was born there in 1866, and he died in 1957. My brother Willie was born there in 1909. Sadly, he died young. He died when he was 30. Before that, sorry, I forgot my sister Kitty. She was born in 1908. William was born November 1909. And then three of us were like extensive of that. We were born 1911, my brother Abbey. My brother Jim, who is also Caleb James, he was born in 1912. And I was born in May 1913. We were all in May. My mother always said she dreaded the month of May. And by the way, the story doesn't end there. My niece, or my nephew, Bobby, he was born there the year I qualified, 1936. His son, I don't know when he was born, Robbie, he was here, many of you know, he played rugby here with Nina. He was the next in line, and his family, I had three boys, so I think the seventh generation is in Blaine. Now at the same time as my father, as my great-grandfather came, he had two brothers. There was George, as far as I know, and John. George would be the grandfather of my mother. John who was another brother, he had a son, Henry, who was responsible for Dr. Harry. I remember Dr. Harry as a doctor in Nenagh. I remember going in, his surgery was where Pat Tracy operates. And I remember calling there with my mother in Dr. Harry's time. Now, that meant that my father and my mother and Dr. Harry, they were all three second cousins, the progeny of three original grandfathers, if you like. After that, I said, well, I've got to go on to work. I was born in 1913, the youngest. And my first conscious memory would be 1980, and I remember talking in the family home about the end. It was before the treaty, it was before the end of World War I. That would be in 1918. My next experience would be going to school in Tumivara. By the way, after World War I, there was an outbreak of Spanish flu, which is alleged to have killed more people than World War I. And my entire family were stricken. And remember, we had no antibiotics, we had no sulfonamides. Unfortunately, I escaped. I was probably too young to catch it, but I was the messenger boy, taking up hot drinks and doing all this usual thing. But we all survived, due to the greatest healing power of all, the healing power of nature. Without any antibiotics or any sulfonamides, we all survived. Meanwhile, my work had to be done, my cows to milk. There were 2 workmen living in the house at the time, so times were entirely different from, I'm afraid, what they were today. But anyway, I helped my father as far as I could outside. I milked my first cow when I was, I think, 5. She was, I can see her now, a red and white short hair, known for obvious reasons as Pet. But she was quiet and didn't mind the food, tugging out her chest. But after that, I went to school in Tumivara, walked, by the way, to Tumivara School, which was a 2-story building, built in I can see the sign over the door, 1829. The school was built. A 2-story building. There was a stone stairs on the outside leading up to the girls' school, and a window which dare anybody look in at the headmaster in the school underneath. But anyway, I spent 2 years in the girls' school, and I think we have a picture here. It's on the screen. I can name on the back row, which is Nan McCall of Ballybeck. The McCall families are still in Ballybeck. Next is Florrie Powell of Lochile, whose grandfather would be my grandfather's brother. He was Henry Powell. He was a gold miner in Australia. Next to them we have Matt O'Mara and his sister Kate. Well, as you know, Tumivara is the home of the O'Maras. Next to them we have Mary Kate Maher of Ashgrove. And next is Kitty Kelly. Kellys are still in the village. Next to them is my brother Jim. Caleb James is his full name. He was born on the 18th of May 1912, so he'll be 100 if he survives until the 18th of next month. On his left is another Greed McCall, sister of Nams. In the middle row, she was Molly Cummins, subsequently Molly McCarthy. And her, by the way, they're all dead with the exception of myself and my brother Tim. So all these people are dead. Molly McCarthy, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get an enlargement of that photograph and take it out to her son Joe. Next to her, there's Kathleen Luby. There was two Luby families in Toomevara. She married Matty Costellan of Rossgrave. And next to her is Misha, the Babylon. And on my left, Paddy Maher. I was at his funeral when he was 8 years of age. I can remember his broken-hearted father. Next is Nan O'Mara. Next is Lizzie Maher, sister of Mary Kate, who subsequently married Paddy Breslan, and the Breslan family are still in Ashgrove. And next, I'm not sure whether she's Ryan or Keisha. Keisha may be the nickname. All Ryans have nicknames, as you know. And next to her is Nancy Boland. She married Jim Fitzgerald in the village. And on the front row there are two girls there. I've forgotten their names. These two, I've forgotten their names. And next to them, there are two girls, Canarns, Nell Canarns and May Jo Canarns. Their father, who was a fantastic character, Ned Canarns, he played in amateur dramatics. He was the local postman, and by the way, my birth certificate is signed by Ned Canarns. Next to them, I think she is Nan Kelly. And next to them is a great friend of mine. He was 6 months younger, but Jim O'Mara of the post office, as it was known. There was young Jim and old Jim. Well, young Jim was a very good friend of mine, famous for some very good stallions, Pre-Fairy, Milestone, and many others. So that is the history of the girls' school, which I think I left, I think it was in 1919, and came downstairs to Hall Cahan, Michael Caine, one of the best teachers I ever met in my life, a dedicated teacher who taught me Irish, and it was my best subject in school. Sadly, I wasn't able to continue, but Michael Caine taught Irish as any other subject. And I can remember on the foundation of the state, when Irish was made compulsory, he blew a gasket. He was furious at the idea of making Irish compulsory. And I must say I have to agree with him. It ruined a lot of people's careers. If you didn't pass Irish, you passed nothing. But that meant you hated Irish and your parents hated Irish. But if they had made Irish voluntary and made it attractive, and your scholarships and make it attractive, a lot of volunteers would have learned Irish, and we'd hear Irish spoken today as a second language. Simply, if you go to Wales, you hear Welsh people still speak in Wales, and they're more, if you like, anglicised than we are. I can remember Irish. He taught me Irish songs. I won't sing in my songbox as Bristol. But I can remember one in a Verha na Gerha, Shakoshi quid Voth hair. Near Oshi Queen Ree, Mar Maguldi or Gocht hair dog whale. Gig or Mo Mola Minna was Kurka, a Dishi was Slán, is Fear Vegna Corhi, Fear Cricken on Coppeline Ball. That's the only verse I remember of that one. Another one I learned was Dar Danocht on Krieg or Tier na Him. It's a Torre like bio air August ever born there. And all those nor even being more half Chris Queen and Queen again. She have a course of a meal again for born there. I learned that 90 years ago. I thought probably my grandmother, who came from the Cumberland district in Waterford. How my father went better in one, I don't know, but anyway. She was a native Irish speaker. And she said her for natter and everything else, she said her prayer. And I think there's an Irish Bible. John, is it up there?
It's up there.
She had an Irish Bible which I treasure. And I'm afraid I can't read it, but that is original Irish. But that was her first language. My parents and aunts of their family, I could all remember quoting various idioms from Irish. But anyway, that was my experience in the school in Tumivara. About that time, I happened to break my leg. How is Gailella? But Dr. Williams, he was a new doctor, he hadn't been very long in Tumivara. Dr. Williams was sent for, again, as I said, there were no mobile phones, so I was contacted. I think he happened to be in the snug in Macamara's, his pal, Dick Morris. So Dick and Dr. Williams came up, and I was lying on a stretcher in the kitchen in Blaine. And Dr. Williams put me, this leg, he put me in plaster from my crutch to my ankle. And I can still remember him standing at the end of the stretcher. Dick Burris was at the other end. He said to Dick Burris, "Do you think it's that straight now, Dick?" He said. Well, it was straight. And I lay on that for 6 weeks. Then I began to get a little bit active. My father made a pair of crutches for me. He was very handy with his hand. So the plaster was taken off, and I hopped about on the crutches for a couple of weeks, and then I threw them away. Where did I go from there? 19. Anyway, I continued in Tumivara School until I think it was 1926. And when Michael Caine died, and John Larkin took over the last couple of years of my time in Tumivara. We then had in Ballymackey, oh, by the way, I should have mentioned in the 1920s, we had a civil war. No, we had a rebellion. And the house, obviously, the door was bolted at night, big backstick behind there. One night, knocked into the door, and my father went down. "Who's there?" He said, "We're on the run. Was there anywhere we could put up for the night?" He says, "Are you wearing masks?" "No, come round and show us at the windows." Come round anyway. My father opened the door and let in 4 men who were on the run. My mother got up and she knew one of them was Paddy Sheehy of Bushfield, who was well known to my father and mother. The other was Eddie John Ryan. I think he was a partner with Sheehan and Ryan one time. I may be wrong, I think he was. But Eddie was more interested in greyhounds than he was in business. The other 2 men, I don't remember. I don't know their names. That was fine. There were difficult times, and the rebellion finally ended treaty was declared, and then we started a civil war. Well, we did far worse things to each other than happened to the Black and Tans. The Black and Tans were tough, but nothing compared to what we did to ourselves. And nothing is worse than civil war, brother against brother. And we're still, the legacy lingers on. But I can remember at the time there were shootings. I remember that there was an occasion in Nenagh when there was a lot of shooting, and Mrs. O'Mara of O'Mara's Hotel was a rather buxom lady, and if some of you will remember, there was a porch in front of O'Mara's Hotel. So she came out to see what all the shooting was about, and she was caught with a stray bullet and shot dead. Life in Tipperary, in Toomevara especially, was an awful lot different from what it is today. Toomevara suffered terribly during the famine. My grandfather and some of his brothers, when they were older, one of their jobs was to take down loads of turnips, tip them up in the square. Well, it's not very substantial food, but I suppose a load of turnips, maybe with a bit of flour, take some of the wrinkles out of your stomach. But when I think that my grandfather took turnips to the village of Toomevara to try and help starving people, we're often accused of living in the past. But that brings it back a little bit close to me. I don't think there's anything else I can... Well, you may want to ask me questions, Michael, about life in the village at that time.
You recall, I think, at one stage, how there was one nice incident where the church was set on fire.
Oh yes, that's right. Some dedicated Irish patriot decided to strike a blow for Irish freedom, and he put a match towards the church. It was built in 1833 and was a very interesting structure. The pews were cubicles. You went into the cubicle and you would be sitting with your back to the preacher. You could be playing poker for all he knew. But anyway, and they were on pitch pine. And this Irish patriot decided to put a match to it. And of course the church, they were on pitch pine and they burned like candles. But the entire village, well, as many able-bodied men and women as could, turned out. There was not one member of our community in the village, but the village turned out en masse, bucketed water from the stream and the fountain, and they saved the structure from total destruction. Now, I have often quoted that. I think the word ecumenism hadn't even been invented, but I think it was a great tribute to our Catholic neighbours, and maybe indirectly to the Protestants of the area as well, that they felt they should try and save the structure. I have to say that the building was subsequently deconsecrated by a representative church body and is now in a parlous condition, in danger of total demolition. So it's disappointing. It should have been saved, but Protestants got a bit thin on the ground and certain churches were closed. And sadly, Toomevara, which should have been saved, it was one that was closed as well. Now from there, anything else, Michael?
I think that was
from there...
well related, yeah. I think we talked about going on to Sligo there. We talked about going on to Sligo.
Oh yeah, no, before we went to Sligo, there was a little private, semi-private school started in Ballymackey. And there was the diocesan curate. Mr. Bird, B-U-R-D, very good teacher. And there were about 18 or 20 of us. I remember Joe Starr, brother of Mick and Tim, Godfrey Burnell, brother of Kevin, and another famous man, and various other people. There were about 18 or 20 of us attended that school. I used to cycle from Blaine to Ballymackey to that school, where we were taught Latin and French and a lot of other subjects which we found useful when we went to my next school, which was Sligo Grammar School. Now, to get to Sligo Grammar School, it meant catching the train at Nenagh. To get to the train at Nenagh, my father, in pony and trap, we drove to Nenagh station, got the train at Nenagh. I think it stopped at Shelley Halt, and it stopped at Bird Hill, and eventually we got to Limerick. We changed at Limerick and travelled all day up the west of Ireland to Sligo Grammar School. Later on, I travelled. Dick Casey, who was a good friend of ours, Dick used to drive us to the station, but to begin with, pony and trap. But I went to Sligo. I was 15 at this age, 19, 20. Anyway, I was 15. I think I was 15. A boarding school where they had, some of you will have heard of the fagging system. And this fella came up to me and he said, "You're going to be my fag." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "You'll clean my shoes." I said, "You must be joking, Terry." No, I said, "No." I'm able to take care of myself, right? And the headmaster, I was 6'4". He was a Mr. Blackburn from Kilkenny. He used to turn out, and that's where I learned to play rugby. And he used to turn out and play rugby. We'd form 2 teams from the school. And on this occasion, he was on the other team. And he got the ball. Well, I thought, well, the other side gets the ball, you tackle him. And I knotted myself around his ankles. And he's fallen yet. He was furious. He got up and he picked me up like a rag doll and he slapped me off the ground. Today he'd have made I got a red card, he'd be in the sin bin, but anyway. That didn't endear me to Mr. Blackburn. And I spent 2 years there. Now, I want to take back the roll call in the grammar school. I can remember it. I won't give it all to you. But I can start. Allen, Armstrong 1, Armstrong 2, Armstrong 3, Armstrong 4. There were a lot of bloody Armstrong. Billiard, Bladder Hassett. Now I'll stop there, but I'll go back to that later on. I could continue, but you wouldn't be interested. My next school was Mountjoy. School. Mountjoy Square. And every year there, it was a tough school, but I had a lot of good friends and I enjoyed my stay there. In the meanwhile, I bought a bicycle from Dick Casey in Toomevara, a rally bicycle, £5.19 and 6. And we had a long whit weekend. And 8 of us left the school on bicycles. I cycled from Mountjoy Square to Shanbally, approximately 100 miles. Well, they dropped off at various points along the way. The last one dropped Joe Rafter in Ross Gray, and I cycled on to Shanbally. And I did the trip in approximately 8 hours, which wouldn't be bad going, I think, for 100 miles. But anyway, I didn't cycle back. Right? I saved 9 or 4 bus fare. A lot of money in those days. Anyway, I finished my time in Mountjoy. Headmaster, who was, Mountjoy had a great record for sending pupils to Trinity. I got what they call sizerships in Trinity. And the headmaster interviewed me, asked me what I did intend doing. Well, I always wanted a medical career. And anyway, at this stage, possibly because of my long association with farm animals and my father and all the rest of it, I said I wanted to do veterinary. Well, you could almost see his nose curl, you could smell the pigs on it. But anyway, I decided I was going to do veterinary. And I went to the veterinary college in 1932. I think there were approximately between 70 and 80 pupils or students, one unfortunate lady student. But that was the start of my veterinary career. I don't think there's anything of note that happened during my stay in the veterinary college. We played rugby, we played London vets, and anyway, we had a good life. One of the students was a good friend named Phil Purcell. And on the first day in the common room, you're sizing it like a lot of stray dogs together, and you're sniffing around each other. This fella come up to me, Phil Purcell. My hair, I thought was, oh, Phil had a head of red carroty hair sticking up back. What's your name? He says, Jack Powell. We'll call you Ginger, he said. And if I had christened in the church, it's stuck ever since. Some people don't. Anyway, Phil was a cousin of Mrs. O'Mara, who was killed in O'Mara's Hotel. She was his aunt, but she was his aunt brother. Another story about Phil. His father was a vet in Mullingar, and they weren't very close together. Communications were a bit erratic, but Phil's father came to the college one day and he wanted to see Phil. And the only address he had, he got from Mr. Nenagh, the registrar. He gave him the registrar, gave him the number. And Phil's father, he called at this house, he said, I'd like to see Mr. Purcell. And this lady said, sorry, he's not here at the moment, but I'm his wife. Phil was married and had a couple of kids. Anyway, that's only by the way. I left veterinary college in 1936. And no job. So I answered an advertisement in the veterinary record, and I was accepted for a job in a little village called Longstanton near Cambridge, where a Major Townsend had an extensive practice. So I went to work for Major Townsend. He had a large equine practice. He had clients like Basil Briscoe, who trained Golden Miller and Insurance, George Lampton, and a lot of top trainers, Tom Leader, and anyway, he had a large horse practice. But I did a lot of the cattle practice. And he paid me £3 a week, which I thought was a bit stingy, but anyway, they fed me and I slept in the house in the village. But on top of in spite of the £3 a week, I had a good life. A lot of the horses, mostly they were broken down and they came there to be rehabilitated, which meant firing. It might be, some of them might be there for a year and a half. And as part of their rehabilitation, some of the better ones, he liked to send them back to the trainers half fit. And we used to hunt them. And I remember hunting a horse called Guiding Light. He won the Galway plate and he fell at Beecher's second time around. We were out hunting one day with the Cambridgeshire hounds, huge field, as you'd understand, and about 100 people there. We happened to be a slow hunt and we were up in front. And we were confronted with this huge big fence, posts and rails, ditch and a big dyke at the other side. So the major says to me, your horse won't jump that, he said, you won't jump timber. When I looked and saw 100 people behind me, I said, there's no way out here. So I said, when he jumped Beecher's brook once anyhow, and again, but he in the belly, and sure he landed in the middle of the next field. I had the best hunt I ever had in my life. But another horse I used to hunt was a horse called Shamgar, belonged to J.B. Rank. He had a funny trick. If you happened to be standing in a pool of water, next thing he lay down. I always kept confident in time. He had a student up from London as an assistant, with a lovely white Macintosh, and the major never told him, of course. And the next thing, Shamgar lay down in the pool of water. White coat from the rock away. Anyway, his wife kept coursing greyhounds. I sat here, heck was rising. Coursing, dirty work. Anyway, we did open coursing. And life was good. And after a year, I thought I was worth a little bit more. I worked like hell. I enjoyed it. But the more work I got, the more mistakes I made at his expense. And after a year, I thought I was worth a bit more. And he put me up to a £5 a week. And then the following November, there was a big outbreak of foot and mouth disease in Peterborough, which would be a town about 20 miles north of Longstanton. And the Ministry of Agriculture were looking for volunteers to deal. Foot and mouth disease, as most of you will know, is probably one of the most contagious diseases known to mankind. And this was a particularly hot outbreak of foot and mouth. One strain is hotter than another. So the major said, look, he said, this is your chance. He didn't say to make your fortune, but the ministry were paying £2 a day. After £5 a week, that was a good deal. So I volunteered and I went to Peterborough to investigate foot and mouth. I'd never seen it. So when you get an outbreak of foot and mouth disease, first thing happens, you draw a 2-mile radius around the infected premises. And every animal, cloven-footed animal in that, has to be inspected daily. So my first job anyway was to patrol this area, and I remember calling to this farm, Charles Bertie Neverson, nasty piece of, and he didn't want to let me in. Eventually I said, well look, I don't mind really let me in or not, but if I didn't let me in, I'd have to let somebody else in. So anyway, he let me in and I went to inspect cattle that were in a loose yard. You had to inspect them closely. And the next thing, he let a bull out. It was in the house. Something warned me that there was a bull on the rampage, but I managed to dodge him anyway. Escaped the bull, but I went into the cow shed. The cows in those days, they were all bailed out. No milking parlours. So I was going along anyway, and I looked at this cow. I said, you don't look too happy. And I studied her for a while. And I took her temperature. She had a high temperature. And eventually she started, they make smacking noises as the blisters rise on their tongue. So anyway, I rang the head office and said, I think I've got a case of foot and mouth. That was my first case of foot and mouth disease. In those days, they were shot and buried with a long trench and filled it with sticks and straw and paraffin oil or diesel, whatever it was, and they were pulled onto a huge fire. I've seen as many as a couple of hundred cattle, maybe 1,000 pigs and a couple of thousand sheep on the one fire. We burned them. And then, later on, when the war started, I salvaged them. But anyway, from Peterborough, I went to various other centres at the request of the ministry dealing with foot and mouth disease. In the meantime, the ministry were looking for recruits, and I volunteered, never fancying myself as a civil servant, but anyway, I didn't care, but I was accepted for the Ministry of Agriculture. And I continued my career in the Ministry of Agriculture. It was very interesting because we dealt with a lot of otherwise diseases you wouldn't meet in practice. Apart from foot and mouth disease, we had anthrax, swine fever, sheep's scab, and various other diseases. And we had to do dairy inspections. And incidentally, tuberculin testing was going on and went on right through the war, and reactors were slaughtered. And sometime in the 1940s, the country was declared TB free. It's now worse than Ireland, because there was TB in wildlife. You're never TB free. However, in 1941, I volunteered to join the RAF. They asked me why. Well, it wasn't to make the world safer democracy. It was more curiosity, and a lot of my pals had joined up, and they just said that. See what I was called up in 1942 and reported to what they call the Air Crew Receiving Centre in St. John's Wood, where we were kitted out, lectured, and did a bit of square bashing. And from St. John's Wood, we fed in Regent's Park Zoo. We would march to the zoo, where we fed to the sound of lions and monkeys, or anyway. Now there's a story attached much later to it, which I'd like to tell you about Regent's Park Zoo. The Queen evidently pays periodic visits. I think she's the patron, but anyway, she pays periodic visits to the zoo, and a royal visit had been announced. So the head keeper called all his keepers and briefed them to their duties and what they should tell the Queen and all. For amongst the keepers was a Kerry man named Paddy O'Shea. And Paddy wasn't too bright. So the head keeper said, now he said, go you down to the porcupine pen and stay there. So Paddy goes off to the porcupine pen anyway. The royal party arrived, and the Queen's agenda was produced, and the man in charge says, Her Majesty would like to see the porcupines. So the Queen was conducted down to the porcupine where I stood Paddy. She said, tell me about your charters. Yes, well, I can tell you, ma'am, says Paddy, the porcupines live to a ripe old age. They're very quiet, and their pricks are 9 inches long, ma'am. That short the royal visit anyway. Stephen was furious. It's just a stupid fool, I should have known you to do it. He said, there are quills, man, there are quills. Leave that to Mrs. Paddy. Before anyone would stop me, goes after the royal party. Says, me ma'am, from the porcupine against it, Paddy, they're after telling me I gave you wrong information back there. He says, there are quills is 9 inches long now. So that her tricks are no size at all. Anyway, after terming, we were moved to Brighton for more square backing and lectures, and we were billeted in, we got the best of billets always, obviously. The hotels were the Majestic and the Grand. So we're in the Grand Hotel where the IRA tried to blow up Maggie Thatcher in her party. But anyway, from there we went to Torquay, more square bashing and lectures, and eventually we got to a little airfield called Booker, near Marlow in Buckinghamshire, where we started flying. And I learned to fly a Tiger-Moth, went solo after 7 hours, and then for our further training we had to go to Canada. So we were posted to Eaton Park in Manchester, where we waited for a long time. Finally we were shipped to Canada. We boarded the QE2 in Gurrock in Scotland, and she travelled unescorted. She went at such a pace that no escort could give her. So she travelled unescorted. There's something on it. Yeah. Anyway, to New York Harbour, and from there we were unloaded one night and shipped by train up to Moncton in New Brunswick. After a term in New Brunswick, we travelled across Canada to Saskatchewan, a little place called Assiniboia in South Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan, it's like going out to sea, miles and miles of prairie, where we were taking off and landing on snow because it was under permanent snow. And instead of undercarriage, we had skids. So Assiniboia was noted for 2 pubs. One was out of bounds and the other was out of the air. So anyway, from there we went to North Battleford, North Saskatchewan, where we moved on to twin-engine aircraft, the Oxford. And we learned to fly Oxfords. Incidentally, learning to be a pilot, they reckon that of 100 people who started, they're lucky if 5% got through as pilots. The others re-mustered as air gunners, navigators, some other branch of the service. But anyway, we learned to fly the Oxford. Difficult aircraft to fly, but difficult aircraft to make a 2-point or 3-point landing. Eventually, anyway, I finished my training and I was taken up to be tested by a Flight Lieutenant Leonard Hassel. If you remember, I mentioned him in the roll call. It has to be the same flight. So he took me up anyway, and I was an LAC, a leading aircraft man at this, and he was a flight lieutenant. I said, by the way, sir, we were in school in Sligo. Yes, how the hell did you know that? I said, would you be Brian, Sidney, Roland, Leonard Hassel? Who the hell are you? I said, I was in school with you in Sligo. Anyway, not because we were in the same school, but anyway, I finished it, qualified for my wings, came back, and we assembled in the Majestic Hotel in Harrogate. We were given a card to fill out. What did you want to do? Well, I was a bit long in the tooth. I put in heavy bombers, medium bombers, light bombers is my preference in that order. Went up for my interview, handed in my card, and to the question of what they wanted at the time, the CEO said, you're going to be trained as a flying instructor. He says, you'll either go up to Montrose or down to Abbey Court Hotel Nenagh. I said, that's what you couldn't say. Before you could say anything, for next. So I went to Montrose in Scotland, where I was trained as a flying instructor. A very interesting experience, I must say. You thought you could fly an aircraft when you got your wings, but by the time you were a flying instructor, you had a bit more knowledge. But there I was sent back to Sutton Bridge in Lincolnshire as a flying instructor, where had three pupils, three French, they were known as the Free French, Mongeon, Caravel, and Bernard. And my job was to train them as pilots. Caravel had a beautiful touch. He could fly an aircraft better than me. Mongeon, very good. Bernard, you never knew whether he was going to land 50 feet above them or 50 feet under. And you had to let him go until you had to decide to take on the interest safety. Anyway, he was washed out. Amongst our other, I won't say pupils, you got some fellow maybe who'd done a tour of 40 ops over Germany, and they come back for a fresher course. Needless to say, you didn't instruct them how to fly them, you just let them take over, and of course they tie the bloody aircraft in knots and do things to the work. And you sat there sort of yawning, having conniption fits at the same time. But anyway, I finished my tour as a flying instructor. I was demobbed in 1945 and eventually went back to the ministry of agriculture. By the way, when I was in the ministry, I didn't have to join, you were in what they call a reserved occupation. So I finished my tour with the RAF, I went back to the ministry, and eventually I came back to where I had been stationed, Huntington. But life wasn't the same. I'd sold about a whole wild oats around Huntington, and fortunately the crop failed. Anyway, I was going to be sent up to Yorkshire. I said, to hell with this. So I went back to Major Townsend, and in the meantime, I got married. I was married in 6th of January 1943. And 18 days later, I was in Canada, so the honeymoon was a bit cramped. But I came back to Nenagh in January 1947. It had been one of the hardest winters, worst harvest, and the hardest winter. Tony, you would remember it. And quite frankly, it was a bad time to start in practice. But when you went out on call, what you wanted was food more than drugs. But anyway, I can paint my first call. A horse with colic, a grey mare. She was out in Caparoo with colic, and she got VIP treatment. Funny thing, when you set up your plate, you wonder who would be the first fly to come into the well. But that was my first call, and from there on, life took off. I had nowhere to live in Nenagh, so the only place I would get accommodation was in Fateen House, where Tom Hogan now trains horses. So we were in that Fateen House for 2 years before we moved into 26 Summer Hill. And one of my patients in Pathian House, this lady arrived one morning with a yellow Labrador, and the yellow Labrador was clapped out, his ears were down, his tail was down, everything was. She was Lady Angela Sinclair Erskine. Give her her full title. She was Sir Archibald Sinclair's mother-in-law, and for some reason she was living in a flat in Dromideer under the auspices of the late Nellie McGrath, great character in Dromideer. So anyway, I knew very little about dog practice, but Hitler, as she called him, I got at the time of units, he was in a pretty clapped out condition. A colleague of mine in Dublin, Ham Lambert, who had a terrific small animal practice, he was a great advocate of vitamin E for old dogs. I think he took some himself as well. Anyway, I prescribed vitamin E for Hitler. That was all right. About 3 weeks later, I got a phone call home. She had a voice like that. I say, what the hell have you done to Hitler? She said. What's the matter, Lady Anne? He's broken out of the kennels, he's gone on to the sailing, he's raped Teddy Goldsmith, and there's hell to pay. Anyway, that was all right. A couple of days later, Lily rang up. She was very friendly with my late wife, Sheila. And she said, the boss there, no, Lily, can I help you? Did you ever ask him, is any more of them pills that he gave to Hitler? Why? She said, is he gone down? No, she said, I want them for my old fella. Mike, you got any questions? Have I missed anything? Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, eventually, I moved in to 26 Summer Hill. And started one-man practice in Summer Hill. Well, Michael, I think you know what one-man practice is like. I often slept in the car, I often went from one breakfast to the next, but I enjoyed it. And eventually, I started taking in assistants, and I always had a yen for the horses. I built stables, and I acquired horses. I must say, first horse I got was a horse called Nenagh, belonged to my brother. And I could do nothing with him. He couldn't be clipped, shod, ridden, or anything. So Jim gave him to me. But Jim wasn't exactly a philanthropist, right? Anyway, I went out one day, I rode, got up on Nenagh, got to ride him outside the gate, and suddenly put on 4-wheel brakes. Wouldn't bloody move.